Chapter 3.5, the circulatory system. By the end of this chapter, you should be able to explain how oxygen and nutrients are transported in the blood, indicate the structures of the heart on a diagram or model, explain the functions of the structures of the heart, examine a mammalian heart using fresh or preserved specimens, take your own pulse, counting the heartbeats using your fingers, list the 3 types of blood vessels, explain the functions of blood vessels, name the components of the blood, tell the functions of the components of the blood, list the 4 blood groups and indicate their compatibility, and explain the causes and prevention of anemia and hypertension. Here's a video that will help introduce a misunderstood genius, William Harvey, who was one of the first to describe the process of circulation in the human body. Of course, all organisms need their cells to be supplied with oxygen and food in order to function. Small, single-celled organisms, they require, or they can get their oxygen from simple diffusion from the outside world, and they can get rid of their waste this way as well. But as an animal gets larger, the diffusion distances increase and your body is not really able to get enough oxygen just by this simple diffusion. It's mainly due to an increased size, and the ratio between the surface area and the volume gets smaller. So as diffusion takes place through the surface area but has to reach the innermost volume, the bigger the organism, the less effective simple diffusion becomes, okay? Humans, we're made up of billions of cells. Most of them a very long way from the direct source of food or oxygen. So a more complex transport system is required to supply the needs of the body cells and remove the waste that they produce. That's why. So just to summarize here, small single-celled organisms like this amoeba, they use diffusion. As they get bigger, the ratio between surface area and volume gets smaller, okay? And the bigger the organism, the less effective this process of simple diffusion takes. And that's why animals like us need complicated transport systems like the one we are learning about in this unit, the circulatory system, okay? So the human transport system is known as the blood circulation system, which has got 3 main elements: the bloods, the pipes, the blood vessels, the pump, which is the heart, and the medium, which is the actual blood. Okay, so here's a little video just emphasizing the importance of surface area to volume ratios. It's very, very important in biology and a very important concept to understand. The human circulatory system has got what's known as a double circulation process. You've got one carrying blood from the heart to the lungs and back again to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide. The other is carrying blood all around the rest of the body and back again. So that gives us a really effective way of getting oxygen into the blood and then supplying it to all the body's cells. As you can see here, there's our heart. This is why it's called a double circulation. It's pumping some all the way around the body and then it comes back, and then also one to the lungs and back. This is 2 separate circulation systems. It's known as a double circulation system. Really important that you guys get that. Pulmonary circulation, anything pulmonary is referring to the lungs. So this is blood flowing from the heart to the lungs and back. Sorry about that. And we've also got here the systemic circulation. Blood is pumped from the heart and all around the body and back. So that's systemic and we've also got here the pulmonary. Pulmonary, lungs, systemic, the rest of the body. This double pump is known as a very efficient system. Here's a video that explains the double pump system of the human circulatory system in more detail. Blood vessels. There's three main types. What I'm going to talk about to start with here is the artery. So the artery is what carries the blood away from the heart. So just going back to this one, heart, we've got it going to the body and also to the lungs. These two here are arteries. Because they're being pumped away from the heart, they're on a high pressure, and this is oxygenated blood. We've got arteries going all the way around to our body carrying oxygenated blood. There's one exception, that is the pulmonary artery, the one going to the lungs, because that does not have oxygenated blood. It's going to the lungs to get oxygenated. Veins are carrying the blood back to the heart. They're low in oxygen and in a lower pressure. Okay. The veins themselves, they've got a thin wall with very little muscle, whereas the arteries have got a thicker one. And the reason for that is because this is at a higher pressure, it's really, you don't want that to get punctured. And you also, it's very important here that the artery maintains that high pressure. This cavity in the center is called the lumen. And the capillary, this is where the blood transfers from a artery to a vein. And they're really, really thin and allows for whatever is transporting oxygen, for example, to diffuse at a fast rate. For example, at the alveoli around the lungs. Here's a video that shows, or a animation rather, that shows the capillaries undergoing gas exchange at the lungs. Time for an activity. This one is 3.18 on page 106 of your textbook, to investigate the role of valves in veins. And here's a video which also shows the role of valves in veins. The capillaries, you can see here, all down the center, are the sites of the exchange of substances within the body. Blood flows from the arteries, passes on to the capillaries here, and then, well, first of all, the capillaries, remember, they've got very thin walls and a big surface area, so substances like oxygen and glucose that are needed by the cells easily pass out of the body by diffusion along a concentration gradient, and as the same way that substances produced by the cell, like carbon dioxide, pass back into the blood through the walls of the capillaries and then leaves the capillary network flowing back into the veins to be returned to the heart and recirculated around the body. We're going to learn about that process right now. The human heart. The heart itself is made up of a unique type of muscle known as cardiac muscle, and it's got a double pump system like we learnt about, and so that blood can be delivered to the body about 70 times every minute. The walls of the heart are almost entirely made out of muscle, okay, and the muscular walls supplied with the blood by the muscular walls are supplied with blood by the coronary arteries. The muscles within the heart also need to get a lot of oxygen, and they also need to get rid of a lot of carbon dioxide because they are a muscle themselves. Okay, so let's just have a look here at the working of the heart. I'm just going to break this down into a few steps for you. To start with, or these are just a few points that are re-emphasizing what I've just gone through. 2 pumps, cardiac muscle, a lot of this is muscle, and you've got the coronary arteries that are providing a constant supply of glucose and oxygen, so the carbon dioxide does not build up. Okay, here's a video that shows the functioning of the heart, and we're going to break this down in a moment in the step-by-step process of how it all works. Alright, we have got here the working of the heart. So, generally in these diagrams, you will see red as oxygen-rich blood and blue as oxygen-depleted blood. And we're going to follow the journey of it. To start with, deoxygenated blood comes into the right atrium. Okay, and what you'll notice here with this one here too, and also my diagram here, is on these diagrams, right is going to be shown as the left as you're looking into it, because it is as if the person who owns this heart is facing you. So the right atrium here is just up the top. It's this section here that the deoxygenated blood is coming into. It's coming in from the rest of the body, it's going around, it's done its job, the oxygen's left, and it's then coming back into this heart. Of course, it wants to get rid of all the carbon dioxide that it's loaded up in there, so it needs to then pump it into the lungs, and it needs to get loaded up with oxygen again too. So we've got here the atrium up the top. This contracts and forces the blood into the ventricle. The ventricle is down the bottom. And a nice way to remember that is just alphabetical order. A is up the top and V, ventricle, is down the bottom. So once the blood enters here, the right ventricle contracts and forces the blood into the lungs, where it picks up the oxygen. Great. The oxygenated blood then comes back in to the left atrium, which is on the right hand side, and it's filling up this top part of the atrium here. The left atrium contracts, pushing it down into the ventricle. So we've got the 2 atriums on the top, 2 ventricles down the bottom. The left ventricle contracts, forcing oxygenated blood out of the heart and around the body. So this here through the aorta, and all of this oxygenated blood is getting pushed out to around the body. And inside the heart, there's a whole bunch of valves, and their names describe their appearance. Bicuspid, 2 parts, tricuspid, 3 parts, and a semilunar half-moon valve. Each time the muscular walls of the heart contract and force blood out, some of these valves open to allow blood to flow in the right direction, but they're only allowing blood to flow in one way. The atria fill with blood and the ventricles fill, followed by the contraction of both ventricles, which empty the heart. And there's something called diastole, which is when the heart muscles relax and fill with blood, whereas systole is when the muscles contract and force the blood out. So there's a constant contracting and relaxing of this. The pressure in which this is happening is known as your blood pressure, and the doctors measure it in a way that covers the cardiac cycle. You can learn more about that in your book at page 109, which is also the same page of your next activity, which is examining a mammalian heart. Here's a video that will help you examine a mammalian heart in a heart dissection. Activity 3.20, measuring your own heart rate and investigating the effect of activity on your heart rate. Page 111 of your textbook. Here's a video of a heart rate investigation. Did you know the more red blood cells an athlete has, the more oxygen they can carry, so the better that they can perform? Some athletes actually train at altitude because your body responds to the low oxygen by making more red blood cells. In many sports, this training is legal, but some other ways of increasing your red blood cell count to avoid oxygen debt is not. Sometimes athletes remove some of their blood, store it, and then put it back in a blood transfusion, and Others can use hormones, but this whole did you know thing is just emphasizing the fact that your body needs that oxygen, and the most efficiently that you can get it in there, the more better you are going to perform. Here's another video that's going to help explain these concepts in a little more detail. The blood. What is it made up of? Well, it's mostly made out of this stuff called plasma. It's this yellow, strawish coloured liquid. You've got white blood cells, which we're going to go into quite a bit more detail about in the next unit, and red blood cells, which we've already talked about quite a bit. The transport medium from the oxygen is the blood plasma, which carries the red blood cells and the white blood cells and the platelets. Okay, we've got carbon dioxide is transported in the plasma and back to the lungs, and urea, which is a waste product, is carried in the plasma as well. Here's a video to emphasize the important points of the composition and what your blood is made up of. Let's go into a bit more detail about red blood cells. They are packed with hemoglobin, and that is what binds to the oxygen to take it around. Have a look up here on the left. When hemoglobin binds to oxygen, you get something called oxyhemoglobin. That's the hemoglobin that's carrying oxygen, and then eventually it will unload it onto the cells that require it. Remember those mitochondria? Yeah, they need the red blood cells oxygen they need the red blood cells to unload the oxygen so that they can undergo their aerobic respiration. If your body is not getting enough of the oxygen, you can feel not that good, and this could be due to an illness known as anemia. Because the hemoglobin in your red blood cells is based on iron, you need to eat enough of it. And if you don't, then your body can't make enough of these red blood cells and you can't transport oxygen around efficiently, which is known as anemia. And if you have anemia, you could be quite pale, you won't have much energy, and essentially you are oxygen deprived and you'll be very fatigued. So that's why it's important to eat plenty of iron. Here's a video that explains some of anemia and red blood cells in more detail. White blood cells. These are bigger than red blood cells and really, really important in your body for fighting infectious diseases. Okay, they are part of your body's defense system, and they form antibodies. Antibodies we'll talk about a little bit more in a second. There's two main types here. There's those phagocytes. They're the ones that are engulf bacteria, so they eat them like a Pac-Man, and the lymphocytes are the ones that release antibodies. Here is a short video that explains the role of these white blood cells. Platelets. This is something else that is in your blood that's really, really important. It basically helps your blood clot. It makes these thread-like proteins. If you cut yourself and then there is blood coming out, most of the time people will eventually stop bleeding thanks to platelets. They are small fragments of cells important for clotting. Some people, if you have a certain genetic condition, you may not be able to clot your blood, and that can be very dangerous. Alright, here's a little bit more information about platelets in a form of a YouTube video and another YouTube video to really emphasize these points. Okay, let's talk a little bit about human blood groups. Okay, have a look here on the table of the right. This is the different blood groups that are found in humans. There's 4 different types: A, B, AB, and O. How these are basically classified is due to some special proteins called antigens, which are found on the surface of cells, including red blood cells. They allow cells to recognize each other and also recognize cells from different organisms. So, if the cells in your immune system recognize a foreign antigen on a cell, they will produce antibodies. And these antibodies will join the antigen and destroy the foreign cells. And I believe that I have got some slides coming up in the following unit about these antigens, so you can learn a little bit more about them then. But in terms of the context of these blood groups, the different antigens that are found on the surface of red blood cells give different human blood groups. Okay, so the best known is the ABO system. So in this system, which is what you can see there on the right, there are several different blood grouping systems, and this is just one of them. But in this system, there are two antigens on the red blood cells, antigen A and antigen B. Remember, those antigens are protein markers. There is at least two possible antibodies in the plasma. They're known as antibody A and antibody B. And unlike most other antibodies, these antibodies are present in your body all of the time. They are not made in response to a particular antigen. This table shows you the 4 combinations of antibodies and antigens which give those blood groups. Now, if blood from different blood groups is mixed together, there may be a reaction between the antigen and complementary antibody. So this makes the red blood cells stick together. Agglutinate. You don't really want that. The blood's not going to be working properly, and you're going to be blocking up the capillaries and the vessels. And if someone loses a lot of blood, they might need a blood transfusion, right? So blood taken out of one person is given to another to save their life. But before that happens, it's important to know that the person has the same blood group. Otherwise, there can be complications, just like what we heard about just before. All right. It's not usually the case that only one type of blood can be given. Blood group O, this one has got no antigens on it. So what that means is they can only receive group O blood. So someone with group AB, which has no antibodies, can receive any type of blood. Okay, so this is no antibodies, no antigens. So AB, they can receive any type of blood because there's no antibody in the plasma. Someone with group O, because the antigen is on the red blood cells, they don't have one. They can only receive O blood. All right, so moving on here, there's another activity, 3.21, about modeling the effects of narrowing blood vessels on pressure. This can be found on page 115 of the textbook. All right, hypertension. So as we saw in section earlier on, 3.1, iron-rich food includes including meat and liver, also things like apricots and some green leafy vegetables. They've got iron in them, and your body needs the iron. And girls are actually more likely to become anemic than boys because they lose iron each month in their menstrual bleeding. Women are more likely to be anemic than men because of the demands of pregnancy and so forth. However, both men and women can get it. If you bleed a lot, there's a good chance that you may get it too. Okay, hypertension. This is another problem that you could possibly get with your circulatory system. It's also known as high blood pressure, which you may have heard it be referred to in the past. And this is generally greater than 140 in terms of like diastolic pressure, greater than 90. But over 90% of the cases of high blood pressure is actually unknown why people actually get it. But around some local places, such as Addis Ababa, a lot of people have got it, okay? And there's a number of factors that can increase the risk that you getting it. One of those is actually having not exercising much, or eating lots of salt, drinking lots of alcohol, not moving around much, and so forth. So the treatment is just basically doing the opposite of all that stuff. losing weight, lowering your salt levels, and becoming more active. So the treatment of hypertension is, basically just sticking to these various ways to sort of prevent it as well. So just exercising more is a really good start, but a lot happens in the type of foods that you eat as well. All right, key terms: veins. Remember, the veins carry the blood back towards the heart at a low pressure. Capillaries are capillaries are what link veins and arteries and take blood to all of the organs and tissues of the body. Cardiac muscle, this is the contracting muscle of the heart. Red blood cells carry oxygen right around the body. Hemoglobin is the red pigment inside of the red blood cells. Anemia, we've talked about it a lot. This is deficiency disease from the lack of iron. Platelets are the components of the blood that help clot the site of a wound. Antigens are proteins found on the outer surface of cells. And hypertension, finally, is just a different name for high blood pressure. All right, this actually is 3.5 now, the end of this unit. And in this so far, we've learned quite a lot. But in this particular subsection of the unit, we have learned that the body transport system consists of blood vessels, the heart, and the blood. Humans have that double circulatory system. Remember, the pulmonary, the one is to the one that to the lungs, and the systemic to the rest of the body. Three main types of blood vessels are arteries, veins, and capillaries, and they're each adapted for a different function. The heart is made up mainly of muscle. The heart pumps blood around the body in response to the needs of the tissues. Blood enters in the atria of the heart. They contract and force blood into the ventricles. The ventricles contract, and then blood leaves the heart, goes to the lungs from the right and around the body from the left. Valves control the flow of blood in the heart. The blood has four main components: that plasma, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Oxygen is carried by hemoglobin, which becomes oxyhemoglobin in a reversible reaction. Tissue fluid is forced out of the blood in the capillaries and bathes the cells of the body. Exchange of surfaces by diffusion between the blood and the cells takes place through tissue fluid. When the tissue fluid passes the lymph system, it becomes lymph. Lymph eventually returns to the blood enriched with antibodies. There are four main blood groups: A, B, AB, and O. They're not all compatible, and they must be matched carefully before a transfusion. And anemia and hypertension are two diseases of the circulatory system which are commonly found in Ethiopia.